Boris Johnson and his government have come under a lot of scrutiny for allowing other MPs in his government to work second jobs and profit from those second jobs through their lobbying efforts. Now, this has caused a lot of controversy in the government, and also Labour MPs have been calling for a complete ban on MPs to have work second jobs whilst being in office. We want to speak to the public today and see what their thoughts are on this issue and see what they really have to say about this scandal. So, Joe, one of the questions that I have for you is, what do you think of the fact that some MPs have been prioritising their own benefits rather than the ones of their constituency, their constituents? Do you think this is fair, or do you think this is not really fair?
I don't think that's fair at all. Like, if there's evidence that they've been prioritising that other job over the job of being an MP, that's not okay. But I've been a bit mixed on, because I think to attract talent into government, sometimes these people will balance that with the fact that we have taken them out of perhaps the private sector, put them into government, and therefore they're likely to be wanting to maintain previous job and new job. So there's a talent thing there. However, I think when you're an MP, your priority is MP, and that should trump all else.
And what do you think of the fact that certain MPs have also been lobbying whilst in government? Obviously, they've come out and made a lot of money through these efforts. Do you think there should be major consequences for those MPs?
Yeah, I do.
Straight away, they should be given a kick out of Parliament, really.
Yeah, I don't think that's okay. That just doesn't feel right, does it?
Well, another thing I'd like to ask you is, do you think that MPs should perhaps be banned from working in Parliament if they are to work two jobs?
Oh, you got me there. I don't know, like I said, there's that balance of talent. And I think sometimes actually the whole role of being an MP is attracting sometimes the wrong people. However, if I was to call it, I'd say, yeah, ban it. If you're an MP, you're an MP.
And what do you think of the fact the Prime Minister, I mean, he's been a bit slow to handle
Oh God,
this.
he's just slow on everything.
Do you think it's a bit unfair that he's overturned the decision now to actually say that we need to now ban MPs from working?
Yeah, he's always indecisive on this stuff. He should be taking a stance a lot earlier than he does.
MPs having second jobs, should they be allowed to work both jobs, or should they be banned from working two jobs whilst they're in office?
It's very difficult because I don't really think we would benefit from having a parliament that was completely dominated by professional politicians. I think there's something to be said for politicians having a taste of the world outside, really. And I think there has to be a limit. But if they do have second jobs, then clearly they should have a limit on the amount of time they spend on those jobs, so that it's not detracting from the time that they would spend being MPs.
Do you think potentially by them spending that amount of time, do you think it sometimes prioritises their outside work rather than the work of the local constituents, and it causes a lot more problems for those local constituents because their issues are not being dealt with?
Well, it seems to me that if you're going to be a good MP, you have to devote a lot of time to your constituents. And from what I can gather, MPs generally only spend Fridays in their constituencies anyway. So if you're doing a job that takes away considerably from your hours on constituency work, then yes, that is going to work to the detriment of the constituencies.
And what are your thoughts of MPs like Owen Paterson, who've also been lobbying through their second jobs? Do you think this causes a bit of a problem in government?
Well, as we know, that is not allowed, and he broke rules, and therefore what he was doing was against the standing rules. So, he was found to have been acting in a corrupt manner.
And what do you think of the Prime Minister's manner in which that was dealt with? Do you think the Prime Minister has been a bit slow, a bit sort of wrong in the decision that he's made to deal with this tackle? I mean, originally the Conservative government wanted to say that they back Owen Paterson, but afterwards decided to change and go against him. But today, Boris Johnson has proposed that all MPs should be banned from working second jobs in his address to the, I believe, the Speaker of the Commons. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think he was, it may have been an attempt to save his friend, who knows? But in any event, he has put the House of Commons into disrepute, in my opinion, by basically throwing out the existing rules in order to save his friend, and now he's ended up in this position where he's grabbing at anything to try to get out of this position. But it will be You know, it'll be interesting to see what happens because obviously they can't do anything now without the Labour Party support.
I think that MPs should be allowed to work second jobs whilst they're in office, or should they be completely banned from doing this?
I think they should be allowed to work, to have second jobs, as long as it's not against the public interest.
Do you
That's
think?
my understanding.
Do you think by having these second jobs, the MPs are perhaps not prioritising their local constituents, maybe giving them?
Yes, I think if their second jobs are taken away from their constituents and have against the public interest, I think then that shouldn't be permitted. But long as I think it's a reasonable, that's what I believe. I think that they should be allowed to have second jobs. But if it conflicts with the public interest, then no.
And what do you think of MPs who have profited from working second jobs and through their lobbying efforts? Do you think they should have real consequences for doing that, or do you think it's okay for them to do that?
I think it's okay. Again, if it's not against the public interest. If they profit unfairly and it stops them doing their job as an MP, then yes, I think it shouldn't be allowed. But some MPs, they might have. I heard there was an example on the BBC News. One MP had a disabled child, and he had a second job to help him finance the care he needed for his child. So I think it can be. I think it should be allowed in certain circumstances.
And one final question is: do you think the Prime Minister is slightly to blame for the current scandal that's going on with his MPs, or is he not really to blame for what's going on in the government?
I don't think it's necessarily to blame, though. I think it's every person should have their own responsibility. So I don't think necessarily the Prime Minister is to blame personally, no.
One of the questions that I have for you is that what do you think of MPs who are prioritising their own interests rather than that of their local constituents? Do you think they should be allowed to do that, or do you think that's just completely wrong?
I think it's completely wrong. I think, well, first of all, they get paid enough for the job that they do. They get paid something like 80,000, I think, for being an MP. So I think to have a second job is ridiculous when, you know, it's an important job that they do and they get voted in. So there's no need for them to have a second job.
And do you think perhaps that could cause a potential ban on MPs working second jobs? Do you think there should be potentially a ban on MPs across the country working a second job?
Yeah, definitely. I don't see any reason why they should need to work a second job.
Okay. And what do you think of the fact that people like Owen Paterson have got away with making so much money from this? Do you think further MPs who do this and prove to do this, do you think they should also have major repercussions for making money through lobbying work whilst they're in office?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. It's terrible. It's terrible. Like, how can you justify that? I don't understand how you could possibly justify that.
And what do you think about the Prime Minister's handling of the whole issue? That once upon a time he was somehow supposedly friends with everybody, wanted to let everybody sort of pass through and no consequences, but suddenly, as soon as he got public criticism, a lot of criticism from the opposition party, he decided to now today propose the ban himself, whereas previously he wasn't really willing to do anything. What do you think about his entire handling of the situation?
I mean, he handles it like he handles everything else, which is that, you know, he kind of gets away with it until he can't get away with it, and then he's like, oh, let me, you know, U-turn and change this because everyone's upset about it, and pretend that that was the plan all along. So yeah, just the same as everything else, really.
Think of the government. Do you think that MPs in government should be allowed to prioritise their own work before the work of their constituents? Do you think that's a bit unfair?
I think they should definitely be prioritising the work of their constituents, the people that they should be caring for, over like profits for themselves and money for themselves. Yeah.
And in that case, would you say then that MPs should perhaps be banned from working two jobs whilst being in office?
Yeah, I think that would be more than fair, since, you know, as an MP they've like sworn to help the people that they're supposed to be helping.
And what do you think should happen to those MPs who have, like Owen Paterson, profited a lot of money through their lobbying works for other companies whilst being in office? And what do you think should be some of the consequences that those MPs actually face?
Well, I think that's evidence that it's quite corrupt. It's quite a corrupt system. So I think there should be consequences like lessening of power within the party that they're in, maybe like financial consequences. But
and what do you think should happen to the Prime Minister? What do you think he should face for allowing this to go on and then overturning his decision now because he's faced such a backlash? He was not so quick to overturn his decision when he had the public not saying much to him, when he had the Labour Party not saying much to him, but suddenly when the public wants to criticise him, when Owen Paterson got in a lot of trouble, the Prime Minister seemed to have changed his decision. Do you think that's something that we need to address?
Definitely, because he's just trying to, fit the mold that people are trying to get him to. But it was all his friends that he was giving money to, and he suddenly wants to play games like he wasn't trying to help them, innit?
What do you think should happen to MPs who work second jobs whilst being in government? Should they be allowed to do this, or should they not be allowed to do this at all?
Personally, I don't really think so, really, because I know if you run a country, I don't know, I think you should just have your mindset fully focused on that and helping bettering the country, really.
And what do you think the consequences should be perhaps on those MPs who profit millions through their lobbying work whilst being in government, such as some of the local, such as Owen Patterson, who's made a lot of money whilst being in government and lobbying at the same time as working as an MP? Do you think, what should be the consequences for people like that?
I'm not really sure, but definitely shouldn't be allowed to be part of the parliament at all, really.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe further fines, maybe look into more, investigate, see if they've done any other stuff. Maybe jail time, I don't know. I don't really know the laws about it, but definitely should be some form of punishment.
And you think the Prime Minister is partially to blame what he's allowed to happen in his party? I mean, with a lot of corruption allegations coming out recently and a lot of problems within government, and just today there's been a lot of questions from Labour leader as well, Keir Starmer, that the Prime Minister has failed to actually control his party and actually stop these things from happening. Do you think he's partly to blame for this?
Yeah, definitely, because even though he can't really control what his party members do outside the office all the time, he should advise them and I guess try to keep in touch, make sure they're following him and his rules, I guess, because at the end of the day they also represent him.
Questions I have for you is, you think MPs through their work working for themselves in second jobs, do you think that often takes away from their main focus and causes issues for local constituents who then don't get enough attention for their actual issues?
I'd like to think not, for sure, because their role in Parliament is to protect the local constituents. So no.
It depends what their second job is,
And,
really, and how long they spend doing the job.
And what do you think about the fact that some MPs are now potentially going to be facing a ban from working second jobs, especially Boris Johnson's now had a U-turn in his decision and said that he wants to cause all MPs to not be allowed to work second jobs. Do you think this is fair, or is it just absolutely not fair for them MPs?
I don't think it's particularly fair, but there should be constraints on what they can and can't do and how much they can and can't earn.
I think their basic salary is not high enough and they need to do the second job. But there should be restraints on the second job depending what it is.
And what do you think of MPs such as Owen Patterson, who've obviously used this to obviously lobby for other companies? Do you think MPs like that should face major consequences for what they do rather than be allowed to do it and continue working?
I think if proven guilty in a court of law, it's fairly disgraceful.
Yeah, I think it's totally out of order what he did. And I think the measures Boris took, he didn't think about it.
No, he didn't think it far enough. The 12-hour U-turn was a bad move.
Yeah, and it's done I believe it's done quite a bit of harm against the
General public.
the rivalry with Labour government.
And do you think potentially now this causes Boris Johnson's role in government to be questioned a lot more? Should he be leading the government if he's not competent enough to have handled these basic situations within his own party?
No.
He's got a lot of things on at the minute, and in a way this is like a trivial